So I recently had someone send in this awesome punch it and scratch it model from the late 1990s film Toy Soldier. And they were asking some questions about how they could fix their model for live booleans and essentially setting up their joints. And they had some questions about that stuff, and I thought I would go over that in a video and take some time to point out some of the things that they could work on for just getting this ready for 3D printing and everything else. So let's hop in here and take a look at some of the problem areas that they are experiencing and how we can kind of correct them real quick. So to begin, we'll start looking at, I believe this is Scratch It up here, this adorable little guy. And specifically, we're going to look at one of the leg joints and what needs to happen here before this can actually be ready for making a boolean and printing. So I'm going to turn off everything except for these two leg joints. And you can see that the creator of this has actually already gone through and set up some cylinders, some pivots, and we have a clevis over here all set up and ready to go. And there's a few things that just need to happen here and be subtracted from each other before that can actually proceed. So the first thing that needs to happen for a model like this is that everything needs to be solid and watertight. So we have some floating meshes going on here. I'm talking about these different spheres and some of these other pieces of geometry. And to check on that, to see what's going on here, I'm going to go down into the Tool Polygroups menu and click on Auto Groups. So when I turn on Polyframe, we can see everything that is individual. So for instance, these are all connected here. Those are all solid. But over here on the opposite side, you can see that these are floating. So we need to combine all these and get these set up and ready to go. We can do that through live boolean, but there are some maybe problem areas, like some really thin areas over here that could cause some issues. And that's a lot better, in my opinion, to check after you combine everything first before starting to get into live boolean. So what I like to do for my stuff is just run a Dynamesh. You can crank up the resolution to whatever you want just to figure out exactly kind of what's going on with your mesh. So I know, for instance, this little thing is going to be subtracted in here from the other kind of cylinder that's kind of popping in there. But what I can do is go down into my display properties, turn on double, and hold Control and Shift, grab a selection lasso, and I'll just select half of that and look at the geometry in here. Up through here, it's just getting so extremely thin. I just know from experience, you're gonna have to print this very large to be able to get this to work. So there's definitely some, I think, additional work and volume that should be pulled out over here, just because, especially right up here through the top, it's getting so absurdly thin. So that would be my first piece of advice for those that are kind of wanting to get into a place where they can start 3D printing their geometry and all their different stuff that especially is going to have some clevises or any kind of pivot. And let's look at our joint down here next up. So the person who wrote in also mentioned that they were having some trouble getting live boolean to work, and that they thought it was to do with their resolution, that the resolution of their character was too high. So they have about a 40 million plus poly character here, and I will say right now that that is actually not the issue. I've worked on characters much larger, in the hundreds of millions that I've worked with live boolean and Dynamesh boolean as well. So let's look at what's going on here. So in our tool menu, under boolean, the make boolean mesh button is grayed out right now. So I cannot make a boolean mesh from these two pieces of geometry. The actual reason for that is because we need to come up here and toggle on live boolean. And you'll see that that will instantly make that other mesh, that other leg, vanish. And that's actually because this mesh is already set to negative. And we can actually see the interaction of what's going on there by toggling on and off our solo mode. So if I toggle off solo, I can see at its apex, all the way back at least, the leg is actually cutting into this other piece of geometry. So what I recommend for a situation like this is turn on live boolean, get a test and figure out, exactly what's happening there. Maybe you can subtract it, and at least from there I would start to fade out this shape and start to get a nice kind of taper and curve heading back towards that leg, so that we're not getting this super sharp kind of cutout there. I've seen toys and figures with this kind of interaction. I think it looks kind of trashy. It looks like there wasn't much effort put into, thinking about it, the maximum bend of a singular joint. So at this point, we can actually live boolean both of these and start to remove these meshes, but there's actually another area here that isn't quite what we want. If we look at this other mesh, this one, the other leg, it has the positive peg or pin that will be interacting with the negative here. First, I would make sure you have your clearances set up, so I would give a little bit of clearance there depending on the scale that you're going to print. And material, you could do 1/8 of an inch, probably less, and go crazy from there. But for this, it's not lined up properly, so the live boolean isn't going to do exactly what we want, which is a little bit troublesome. But let's go ahead and do a live boolean just to make sure that it's working. So we got live boolean turned on, and over here we'll just click on make boolean mesh. See that calculate going all the way across, ding, 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 all done, and we got our live boolean mesh right here. If I hit Shift F or hit the polyframe button, we can see that it is completely subtracted from here, but we are getting the actual resolution from that other mesh on here. So what might be nice is also going through and maybe dynameshing that other piece and just making sure that the resolution is getting to an appropriate level. All right, so let's take a look back here at this leg again. Let's say that this is too high of a resolution and we do want to live boolean this at some point, but our poly count's getting up really high. We've dynameshed, we're at 1 million polys, maybe even more, and this is just the leg of a character. So let's try to lower this poly count really quick. I am going to use the Z plugin menu, which you can find right up here. I have it docked over here on my sidebar. We're going to go into Decimation Master and just click on Pre-Process Current. Essentially what Decimation Master will do is it will allow you to pre-process your geometry, which is what it's doing right now, and then after it's processed, it just saves it in RAM, and then you can kind of play around with your percentage of decimation here. So let's try something crazy, like 5%, and that's estimating that that'll be down to maybe about 100k polys or so. Click on Decimate Current. We're down to 50k because that makes more sense. I'm not sure why that's... there we go, the points. All right, we're good. So we can polyframe on that again and just kind of see exactly what our decimation here has done. Play around with the decimation slider if we want to increase or decrease that further. But from what I can tell, we're not really losing too much form here. We can see that we are getting some faceting, but depending on the scale that this is going to be printed at, I would say that this is pretty negligible. Like it's not going to be that big of a deal essentially. There are some areas where there's some holes in our meshes, which is why I always dynamesh first to make sure that I can find those areas where these problem areas are occurring. So let me undo and step back and show you how you can fix those real quick with a move brush. I have my move brush selected. In your brush menu under auto masking, we'll find that real quick, we will turn on, scroll up, back face masking. So right here, back face masking. And essentially what that will allow us to do is pull in on these little areas here where we're getting these tiny little holes that are going to cause some errors for 3D printing. We'll just kind of play around with that, just kind of push and pull that in real quick, and we can re-dynamesh that just by control clicking and dragging on our canvas. Now you can see that it's closed up those holes and everything is good to go. Awesome. So let's take a look at a couple other areas where some problems might occur real fast. So I noticed in a few areas that there were maybe some joints that weren't properly set up, which is totally fine. I think it's going to be pretty easy to fix as long as you actually have the original mesh that you inserted into this geometry. If not, you should probably be able to eyeball it and get it to line up pretty well on your own here in ZBrush. But from what I can tell, it looks like we are missing the actual joint or connection piece that should be attached to the lower arm. I'll pull up an image of the original toy, or just an image I found online as a good reference. If you look at the corner of the armpit there, you can see how that joint works with that lower arm there. We would typically see a similar thing in the lower leg as well. So what I have done here in ZBrush is I have just inserted a real quick cylinder. I just kind of eyeballed it and lined it up. And it's just low poly right now, but I can maybe add in some subdivision levels so you can get an idea for what we want here. And again, it's not lined up perfectly, but just so we can kind of get an idea. So for something like this, at least the way it's set up right now, let's take a look at what we got. So I'll turn off everything except for that lower and upper arm piece. So as it stands right now, this lower arm has no way to kind of connect and hold into that upper arm. So if we were to print both of these, obviously they're not going to be able to snap together and then rotate. So much like the knee for the Scratch It character that we just looked at, we need to take something like a cylinder and attach that by just merging these together, which is what I've done here real quick. And we got some floating stuff in here and everything else, but very quickly for the demonstration, we'll just go ahead and Dynamesh those together, get that feeling good, and that's looking a lot better. And maybe we can very quickly fill in that hole. We'll just leave it for now. But we wouldn't want that hole if we were to 3D print this. And then I'll turn this on negative, make sure live boolean is on up here, and we can get an idea for what that is going to look like. So obviously not set up correctly for exactly what we want, and we are getting some other areas in the arm where some of the geometry is penetrating in a way that would not be great for once we bent this arm. So for instance, let's turn on the live boolean real quick, and I will just rotate this in a very terrible way. So I'll just rotate this, or twist in that, there we go. So that's coming down. And now I can start to get an idea for how far I can actually rotate this arm. And then I can get an idea for how far I can rotate this geometry until it essentially starts to penetrate some of the other parts up top. So you can see as that starts to rotate along that axis, this forearm is starting to bend in a little bit into here. So that's not great. But also at this stage, if we were to bend this, we had some areas where the geometry was poking through here. So if we were to subtract that and boolean that, those areas would become more visible as the arm bent. So these are some of the areas and things that I like to think of when I am working on creating joints for my characters. I hope that that has been beneficial, just to kind of get a quick little overview and idea of how I like to tackle some of these. And I wish you luck moving forward for the person that sent this in, and as well as everybody else that's watching this. I hope you guys can get some useful info out of this, and good luck 3D printing some cool articulated characters in the future. All right, you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.